Good morning, colleagues.
Morning, sir.
Hi, Eva. How are you?
Well, and yourself.
I'm okay. Morning, everyone. Welcome.
Morning,
Morning.
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 Morning, sir.
Hi,
Morning,
Ivan. Hi,
all.
Frank.
Morning.
Morning. Today we have Ant from the design practice, Frankie Pappas, taking us through their journey in architecture. Ant, over to you.
Cool. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. And thanks so much for the invite. Um, yeah, what a wonderful privilege to be able to speak to you today. Um, so I suppose the first question is who is Frankie? And for that, we need to go through to or back to 1930s Paris, particularly on the left bank of the Seine, um, where there was a man called Nicolas Bourbaki. And Nicolas Bourbaki was um, a man teaching cards, uh, baccarat specifically. At least this is what his bio said. And he burst onto the scene, mathematical scene, and started revolutionizing mathematics in the 1930s. And the story goes that he was a 90-odd-year-old who grew up in he grew up in Greece, moved, and wherever he went, war followed him. So he went to the Eastern Bloc countries, war followed them. He eventually ended up on the left bank of the Seine teaching baccarat, and started publishing papers left, right, and center, which were absolutely revolutionary. But it ended up that Nicholas Bourbaki was not a 90-year-old. He was actually 12, 21-year-olds. And so this idea of the collective pseudonym, where people forego their ego in order to pursue a greater goal, was always super interesting to me. And when you're in search of a collective pseudonym, I think there's only uh, one place to go searching for one, and that's 1970s glam rock, and in particular the band Mott the Hoople. And now Mott the Hoople got its name from the 1960s novella by oh, now my brain is um, oh my word, who was the author now? Anyway, this will come to me in 1 second. The 1960s novella where um, the which is about Mott's adventures, bucking all societal norms. And Buck's Mott did this with his best friend and his co-rebel, Frankie Pappas. And so this name, Frankie Pappas, became the thing that the collective pseudonym under which we'd pursue these goals that we're trying to live out and fulfill. So that's Frankie Pappas. And today's talk, the theme at least, is going to be rules for life. Now, there's a bit of a joke at Jordan Peterson. It's a bit of a joke at a whole bunch of things. But, um, what I want to really talk about is what are some of the rules that guide how Frankie operates, and what are the rules which shape the work we produce. So there are 11 ideas in today's talk, and each one of them is associated with a project. And that association may be through a conceptual link, it may be through a material link, a manner of construction, or very likely through the people involved in the project. In any case, I hope you enjoy the thoughts that I'll outline in the next hour or so. The first one is bear responsibility for your actions. So I don't think we should be telling people what to do so much. Don't tell people what they should be doing, rather show them what you're doing. That's one of the guiding ideas. And today, I hope to show you some of the work we've created and some of the risks we've taken, some of the choices we make, and then the consequences of those. And the advice, advice is incredibly weighty. I don't think it should necessarily be coming from someone in their mid-30s like me. So when one gives it out, more often than not, I think one actually is giving that advice to oneself. So I suppose in a way, this talk is as much a reminder to myself about the values I hold dear, we hold dear, as it is sharing some of Frankie's ideas with you. So the first project is House of the Flying Bowtie. Now the site is in a typical conservative residential suburb in Johannesburg, with amazing street trees, but where walls and electric fences are the primary architecture, and banality in some manner is the order of the day. So the main idea of this is to address the street correctly, particularly so that the future design for the street-facing building could produce some sort of streetscape we feel is appropriate to the suburban context. And this effort is done with the intent of densifying the suburban landscape, whilst protecting old suburban buildings, the trees, the fabric, all of that. So the primary thing was to produce on the left a facade which holds all of the services and the entrance to the street. This building is set back 3 meters from the building line, with the goal that we could produce the building on the right. And that building on the right is completely designed so that we could produce not a building or a earth for one family, but an earth for 3 families and 3 businesses. That was the goal. And you'll see these ideas continually creep through the work I'm going to show you. So there was an old building from the 1930s, which largely remains completely intact. Maybe some doors instead of some windows, so that we would open every single room onto its own private courtyard on ground floor. The ground floor could be given over to all of the public programs of the building. And we then raised all the private issues into a bow tie, which would fly above the buildings and above the courtyards. And that housed 3 bedrooms and a couple bathrooms. This just shows the simplicity of the material palette, which really was white walls painted as simply as possible. And then the main idea that this building would be expressed through its courtyards. And whenever we can produce a courtyard, I suppose we do. With the original ceilings, what these spaces feel like and how they move into one another, how each room terminates onto a courtyard in some way or another. And I suppose there's a recurrent theme throughout our work where we have an obsession with the ceilings, which I think you'll see. And there's something about the ground floor being messed by humans, furniture rearranged, all sorts of nonsense, toys and shoes and everything left on the floor. But the ceiling is for us architects to do something very, very special. I think the religious designers of the past knew that. So that's House of the Flying Bowtie. The next one is if something is nonsense, say exactly that. Now, you will definitely be harmed personally in the short term for speaking your mind, but I think in the long term, you may just gain the trust of the people who you need to trust you. So if you see nonsense, say it and say it out loud. Our next project is House of the Cape Robin, where we think of private architecture as some sort of social act. Now, the site is a steeply sloping site, sloping northwards towards the Outeniqua Mountains, with street access from the highest portion of the site. Now, the main idea was to craft a compact home, a very compact home. I think this thing is 65 square meters, 70 square meters, which would create privacy from the south, whilst opening up to northern views, and then giving over the majority of the site to the endemic flora. And I'm not a big fan of the suburban world we're creating, where there's a lot of giving up on older parts of the city. What I mean by this is I think our previous generation was gifted in Joburg, for instance, the city center, decided to vacate that and move to suburbia. And when that became a bit too tough because of the problems that are inherent in suburbia, well, they up and left that and went to gated enclosures and produced architecture like in the background there, where there's a complete stripping of the landscape, planting a hell of a lot of lawn, and then producing not very, very good architecture to go along with it. My view on windows, for instance, I think it should not be a contentious one, but seems not to be produced very well by architects, is that I think the goal of a window is to let light in and to let air in and to allow for views outwards. Now, the contention or the tension with a window is that often you want to secure the privacy for yourself. And what happens is the window, because you're trying to secure this privacy for yourself, the curtains or blinds come down and the windows never open. In which case a window is not letting light in, it's not letting air in, and it's not letting views out, and therefore, I suppose it's no longer a window. So one of the ideas here was to produce a very, very low building in the landscape, which had all of its windows facing northwards towards the views, and kept a very, very low profile so that Tannie Gertjie in Oomgert, when they're walking their dogs on the street below, their view of the Outeniqua Mountains is uninterrupted. And that's what I mean by architecture as a social act, that if we produce a soft, we can produce a very dominant prospect and at the same time produce an aspect which is really very soft. And I mean soft in that it cares for the occupants behind, the world behind it. And this form, again, is one that, opens up towards the views with a 60-degree triangle in the middle, but also shields from, those southerly winds one gets in on the south coast. And the material palette, again, very, very simple: concrete brick and shutter ply for the furniture. Again, we design all the furniture ourselves. Oftentimes, we build all the prototypes ourselves as well. But it's concrete brick, off-shutter concrete, some paint, and plywood, really. Above the dining room, we have this massive skylight, was really, really one of the opportunities we had. The ceiling itself is only 2.1 meters high, the concrete soffit. And then we have this skylight, which is about another 2 meters higher. So it's about compressing spaces and then releasing spaces. And then opening up towards those northern views with the skylight above you. Again, very, very simple construction techniques. Some concrete bricks, ply or shutter ply ceiling, shutter ply furniture, shutter ply doors, all designed in-house. And then the expression of these spaces, again, the 2.1 ceiling on the right and left, and then a giant step up to the ceiling of the lounge and the kitchen. on the left, the dining room with the skylight above. This dining room is only 2.4 meters wide at its narrowest point. So there's some very, very small spaces. This bedroom, for instance, is 3 meters wide, but it's 4.5 meters high. And then that nook is an important thing, because I think what we often forget in architecture, that seating nook, I mean, at the window, is we often forget the human stories associated with architecture. Is that the two clients are an older couple, and they've had one tradition throughout their lives where when Phil goes and makes coffee for Susan in the morning, and he's sits next to the bed on a little chair. She sits with her back against the backrest, and they have a conversation about what they're going to do that day. And I thought, what we do is we try give theater to this, this tradition of theirs, where Susan could still sit in her bed and face this beautiful view towards the north, and we create this little nook with that 4.5 meter high window, and he could sit in that nook, and Susan and Phil can have their morning discussion. And we highlight this as a significant, personal act, and we give it an architectural, an architectural spatial quality. Then risk personally for the benefit of others. So the ancient Greeks defined their virtue through the heroic death, so capital sacrifice for the collective. Now, as we live, thank goodness, in a less martial society than the ancient Greeks, I think we need to adapt this idea into a slightly calmer form. And something along the lines of virtue is to take a heroic act for the benefit of others. Now, the more micro this act, the less abstract and the more immediately measurable, for me, the better. So this, I'd like to now talk about House of the Pink Spot, where I think the heroic act is through the occupants of this building, definitely not through the architecture. So the idea of this project was, to reclaim space, to reclaim safety, to reclaim rights. Now, the site is a recognized gender-based violent hotspot in Orange Farm in Drizik. And the identified corner, which was identified by the Amnesty International group that is that lives in Orange Farm in Drizik. The identified corner sits on an empty lot of land that had become a dumping spot for garbage. And at night, was a dark place with no working streetlights and minimal human activity. And I think all of this played a part in increasing chances of violent and criminal behavior. So the main idea of this space is to reclaim it and to produce some sort of landmark where community members can sit and find shade and find light, and where conversations can be held, where small theater productions can be held, and where children can play and where grandparents can watch. Now, the materials chosen for this project are what we could get our hands on. In Drizik, the primary architecture is either corrugated sheeting or some cement blocks. But the tallest elements or architectural elements in Drizik are the gum poles, which support the telephone lines and electrical lines. So what we did is we went to go find the tallest gum poles we could, and these were, I think, 15-meter gum poles, and we placed them vertically so that we could get height onto this building. We wanted to produce the tallest building in Drizik. Paint it bright pink so that it becomes a landmark. Yeah, and produce a very, very small space. It's 3 by 3 meters, with some seating underneath, and allow for this area to really become a theatre, allow the use of this building to be dictated by the residents and the gender-based violence activists in Drizik, who all live on this street, by the way. Now, why did we want to create the tallest building in Drizik? So I have a theory that our society gives over its tallest buildings to the things it finds most important. So during the rule of the Catholic Church, the tallest buildings were the churches. In Islamic rule, well, the tallest architectures were the minarets. Now, in today's world, our tallest buildings are given over to financial institutions and multinational corporations. And I think this says a lot about where our society stands and what our society's most greatly values, sadly. So with this in mind, I thought, well, should our tallest building in an area that is recognized or is famous for gender-based violence, our tallest building should be a structure which is which represents the combat against gender-based violence. And this was the idea behind trying to create the tallest building in Drizik. And okay, love is a catastrophe. I think, love is kind of some remarkable disaster. It completely rewrites and upends everything in one's life. And it requires far too much sacrifice, far too much time, far too much devotion. It feels like a great misfortune. Very often, it's a monstrous parasite. And it puts one in a permanent state of stress, which ruins much of life's pleasures. And I mean this in work, I mean this in family, I mean this in hobbies, I mean this in partnership. Love really is a catastrophe. The great irony, though, is that you would wish these catastrophes on everyone for whom you care. Is one of the great things in life to experience. And the project associated to this, I think, is our love project, our Gallery of the Heart project, which has this tagline, "Never another year without love." And the thing is, since 1970, for 38 years, Yves Saint Laurent, which I hope I pronounce correctly and don't pronounce with that irritating arrogance of people who say they're going to Paris, but I'm going to say Yves Saint Laurent just for the sake of it. Well, he sent New Year's cards to his loved ones every year with his death in 2008, and so in the late 2000s, so died this tradition of his sending out cards every year to the people he loved, and I love this tradition. But now, spreading love with a piece of art, I think this is just wonderful. But he, due to personal traumas, in 1978, or 1979, for instance, and in 1993, due to these personal traumas, he missed out on sending cards. And in 1979, you'll see a bird labeled 1978 flying off into the sky, and in 1994 you'll see a 1993 petal floating off into the wind. And he called these his years without love. And when his tradition ended, we decided, okay, well, we're going to take this over so that there's never another year without love. And so every year we pick someone with whom we're close and with whom we want to collaborate, and we produce a card. And the only constraints are that it must take no longer than a day to produce, which is never the case, and that it must be to be able to be produced over a few meals and a few bottles of wine. And that's our goal, to share love with simple pieces of art. And this last one in 2025 was a collaboration between us and Torsten Dekler. Okay. Let your only judge be your 8-year-old self and your 80-year-old self. Not your reputation, not your standing in society, not awards. So if you could stand in front of your 8-year-old self before the world had tried to corrupt you, and stand before your 80-year-old self after the world has really tired of you, I suppose, and not feel ashamed, I think then you're immensely successful. All other definitions of success are very fragile modern constructions. And I think there's a reason that one of the few eternal things in this world is the wit and wisdom of a 6-year-old Calvin and Hobbes, you know. So this project associated to this is House of the Big Arch, which is about marrying sandstone cliff and riverine forest. So it's a home that disappears into the landscape. It's supposed to sit amongst the rocks, sit amongst the trees, sit amongst the birds. And it's, you know, it's a home, I think, that offers animals and plants and humans equal opportunity to find shelter. And it treats the bushveld, I feel, with the respect it deserves. Now, the underlying concept of this building was to bridge the landscape between riverine forest and sandstone cliff, whilst raising the living spaces into the tree canopy, you know, amongst all of that arboreal life. And the building is organized as one thin building which slots between the forest trees, and the shapes and the additions of the central building, they're dictated by the position and size of the surrounding trees. And one thing I'm extremely proud of here is that not one tree was demolished during the construction of the home. And it's something that was taken very, very seriously in this project. Not only the idea of not touching a tree, but I think more philosophically, the idea of revering this landscape more for the future than for its current occupants. Again, you can see a continuation of our work where it's very, very simple material palettes chosen. Okay, always have skin in the game. Now, I think one of the central problems of our contemporary society is that we have people making decisions without bearing any risk. So we have bureaucrats, academics, and consultants. They prescribe policies. Financial experts gamble with other people's money, and pundits pontificate on wars they will never ever fight. In my mind, wisdom doesn't come from theory, it comes from a lived experience. And if you have skin in the game, you are more careful, you are more ethical, and you are more competent. Without it, there is no real talk. Well, there's no real accountability. There's only talk. And for this, I'd like to talk about House of the Co-op, which is a building we designed, we funded, we built ourselves. Every single thing from business modeling all the way to planting plants and building furniture. And it came about because I was looking for a workspace for Frankie, and I couldn't find the smallest space I could find was 45 square meters, and it's not as if we needed 45 square meters of space. So I thought there must be other people in this position, and so what we ended up doing was buying an old building that no one wanted. It's an old apartheid era suburban building, very typical of the ones you'll find in Pretoria, and changed all the bedrooms and a lounge into studio spaces, and then we turned all the staff rooms, the garage. You will all know of that toilet in the background that was or in the back of the building that during apartheid was for the gardener's use and for the storage of brooms and all of that. Well, we also changed that into our studio personally, and then rented out. So we transformed this house into 6 studios with a shared boardroom and kitchen and bathroom. And we took one of these and rented out the other 5. And each space has its own private courtyard associated with it. So these are the courtyards that we try create. These are the types of studios that we're able to produce in this house. Again, I think you'll see the simplicity of the material palette, and then all of that furniture is constructed by us, except for the central table. Again, the private courtyards. More courtyards. When in doubt, put a courtyard in. And these ideas, I think what you'll notice is these ideas were first, they were first executed in House of the Flying Bowtie, for instance, and slowly made more extreme through the years. And I think this is one of the more extreme versions of the courtyards we're trying to produce. But yeah, that House of the Co-op is something we're very, very proud of. Then something I feel very, very strongly about: there is no individual genius. So to me, at least, the Western world has seemed obsessed with idolizing individuals and then anointing them as geniuses. And although great ideas are often articulated by individuals, their generation is always through communities. Through this process of singling out certain people throughout history and saying those were the important ones, this process being the anointing of genius, I think we make a terrible waste of cooperative intelligence. And whether it's Picasso, whether it's Rembrandt, Einstein, Shostakovich, whoever you might pick out, you will find they lived and drew from a very active and flourishing cultural scene. They were only one of the elements within that scene. What I want to see is more energy given to the creative opportunities within this type of cooperative intelligence. Now, the gallery of the Persona Project, I think, is a joke at this. It comes with a tagline, which is the same as our or Frankie's tagline, wonderfully similar, beautifully different. But it's inspired by a piece of art that you see every day, and it's as ubiquitous as it is modest. I don't think one thinks about it twice. When you walk past it at work, at the train station, or at lunch in a restaurant. And that's the bathroom figure, which really is the Frankie logo itself. Um, and I think this is a really remarkable piece of design, this bathroom figure. But what we were thinking is, what if this bathroom figure was just the beginning? What if it could symbolize more? What happens if we could take this mass designation as something we could dress up, and we could take it to individual design. And so we could use this bathroom figure to abstract characters down to their essentials. Those components that we love, that make them who they are. You think Jimi Hendrix with his crazy afro and his left-handed guitar, for instance. And create all of these characters as puppets. And that the people who work for Frankie and collaborate with Frankie could be part of this persona project and the Frankie project itself. But I think there's a bit of a warning in this whole thing, is that these individuals are not always great people. They're not always remarkable people. They all have their faults. And although they were able to articulate genius, they weren't always the ones who produced it. And I think that's a good slide to end on. The last, one thing that is very dear to me personally is this idea of taking seriously one's freedom. If you're not very, 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 very careful, the world will pull you away from your own freedom. It will educate you away from using your entire body into using a tiny speck of a single portion of your brain. It will continuously tempt you into wearing big logos, living in spaces bigger than you will ever acquire, and driving fancier cars than you need. It will suck you into a TikTok and Instagram vortex from which you will never return. So one has to be very cognizant of the fact that your freedom is yours to protect. So live in small spaces, own fewer things, read books, and spend time thinking with your entire body. For this, I think a good example is House of the Yellow Wall, which is about securing privacy in an urban world, but it was also a opportunity for me to personally experiment with a whole bunch of very, very strict parameters. And to test out the ideas I had about the world on my own living space. So this was my space when I lived in Cape Town, and it was a building in an old 1950s police barracks, with everything built around a central public courtyard. And the spatial setup of this design, which I'd love to get into more detail with all of these projects with you. But the spatial setup creates opportunities for public space. But then that needs to be mediated by the internal apartment layouts. A very similar mediation that was required by House of the Cape Robin, for instance, except completely in inverse. So this principal concept was to build a very, very thick wall painted yellow, and then this would separate the apartment's public spaces from its private spaces. And this wall would hold storage, it would hold services, it would hold a kitchen, and all of those would then service its adjacent spaces. And the building is organized with eating, living, and working spaces facing out into the courtyard, and then the bedrooms and bathrooms and service spaces sit behind the yellow service wall. And then what this strategy allowed for was a very efficient movement through the apartment with very, very little wasted space. Now, what's I think interesting about this building is that that this was about having skin in the game. I think it was an accumulation of all the ideas I've spoken about, but I built everything myself. And you will notice all the shelving is shutter ply, but turned on its edge and laminated, so that it would be incredibly, incredibly strong and be able to hold all the pot plants, all the books, anything I wanted to put on them would be able to be held up by these 70 mil laminated pieces of timber. The other reason they laminated is I was driving at that time. I still drive a Citroen C1, which is kind of the smallest car you can buy. And the back seat of that car is 1.2 meters wide. So I would get all the plywood cut at the factory in 1.2 or 1,200 by 70 mil strips. And I would load all of that in the back of my car, bring it back to the apartment, and laminate everything in the apartment. And run it with my inline planer and inline sander in the courtyard. So I was very loud and a very dusty neighbor. Again, you can see all of the work that I was experimenting with on my own time. Avoid things which bore you. So boredom is it's your brain and your body's way of protecting you from things which are not important. This is my view, at least. But in saying that, don't let this be an excuse for laziness. With almost every project in life, you will have to completely redefine the problem set into something that is important to you. And for this, I must speak about House of the Rosebank Health Village, which has become a super interesting set of projects, which are continuously ongoing, but this was the initial one. And whereas I was approached to find a solution to produce some consulting rooms for doctors, which was in an existing building. So it was an office fit out, really, into consulting rooms. This, for me, was not an interesting project. But sitting with the clients who are wonderful and who have time for philosophical discussions, I suppose, the idea was, could we reimagine healthcare as an expression of our humanity? And if we were to think of it that way, what would be the sensory experience of an expression of humanity? Would it be the incessant bleeping that one hears in hospitals? Would it be fluorescent tubes? And would it be the smell of antiseptic? And to all of those, you'd probably say no. But that seems to be the primary set of sensory experiences in healthcare design. What if instead it was all naturally lit? What if the smell was that of petrichor that before rain you get that smell of all the volatile organic compounds being released from the soil that we all love. What happens if it was the sound of running water? What if those were the principles around which we based a healthcare architecture? And so we came up with a set of principles to design by for this small office fit out. And in order to produce these architectures, we had to also, forego the we had to reimagine everything, I suppose. In order to produce democratic access to light and ventilation, we had to reconsider the waiting room. We had to reconsider a doctor's room. I suppose it's efficiency in service of a patient. The originating idea was to break down the notion of a traditional doctor's room. This meant ignoring the conventions of consulting spaces, of waiting rooms, and of corridors. So how could we reconceive of healthcare architecture and its furniture, that's very important, and its furniture to echo the passion of these medical teams? And if the client was to practice value-based healthcare, should the architecture not speak to the same values? And so the corridor became a slightly wider corridor, and in this corridor, we produced these little waiting nooks, which are now filled with art. And these waiting nooks were designed that you could sit in any which way you wanted. And often you see a mom and daughter sitting back or, with their backs against the side walls, chatting to one another. It gives one a sense of privacy. It's not all, the waiting experience is not the conventional doctor's one of everyone on chairs sitting with their back to a wall with a big coffee table in the middle. And the differentiated experience between Doctor 1 and Doctor 2 is that Doctor 1 has the newer version of Reader's Digest or Huisgenoot or whatever the magazines of today are. But in order to produce these spaces, we had to design everything from this waiting furniture to all the furniture in the hospital or in the healthcare rooms, in the doctor's rooms. And that meant even reimagining the exam table, which is normally a steel frame table pushed up against the wall with all the stethoscopes and syringes on the other wall. Now, by eliminating the steel frame, by building it out of timber, by putting all the storage underneath, and by centralizing the examination table, as opposed to pushing it up against the wall, it allows the doctor the freedom really to engage with the patient correctly. So that means they're not examining a patient only from one side. The patient is lying still and the doctor is moving around the patient, as opposed to the patient getting up and moving from one side to the other, which is the convention. The other thing that I really love about this is that these drawers hold the doctor's equipment. So that if a doctor needs to reach for a tool, they never have to take their hand off the patient. They never have to turn their back to a patient, which I think is an important thing. All of these principles and all of these design ideas are now being expressed in a whole bunch of hospital designs we're producing for these same doctors. And those have theaters which are naturally lit. Those have sluices and dirty corridors, which are absolutely beautiful, naturally lit spaces, naturally ventilated. Our wards are naturally lit. Every single space which is not a storeroom is completely naturally lit. All of the consulting rooms open up onto courtyards that you can consult in private outside. These are the things I think we should be pushing for. We should have a very strong agenda for as architects in reimagining spaces, not only for healthcare, but really for, for our cities at large. And I think we should be taking ownership for these things. respect workers and their labor. This is one of the fundamental tenets in my life. And I think everything speaks to this in some way or another. If there's no one producing stuff, then there is no stuff. That sounds like a banal statement, and I suppose it is, but I don't think it's one that our society completely understands. Bricklayers, they lay bricks. Plumbers, well, they plumb, and woodworkers shape timber. Their work is very immediate, very direct, very measurable. As architects, we're one or two levels abstracted from this. You might argue that um, the the building site manager is one level abstracted from laying bricks. We might be two levels abstracted, which is fine. I think it's achievable as a society that there's two levels of abstraction. And we give guidance, we make sure that people's energy and material, we have the time to give that thought and make sure that it's used correctly. And I think we have value in that. I think one level more abstracted than us is someone who's our financiers oftentimes. There's probably place for them in the world, for sure. But then you get levels of further abstraction where people are managing other people's wealth. Bankers are a good example of this, wealth managers, management consultants. Again, you will see a consistent theme in what I talk about is that people who have minimal skin in the game are not the people around, which I surround myself with. I surround myself with bricklayers and plumbers and woodworkers because I find them oftentimes, more often than not, wonderful, wonderful people. But what I was getting at is our society seems to reward people with more abstract jobs. Our society rewards that group of people far more than it rewards workers and laborers. It rewards the keyboard class or the laptop class far more than it does the bricklayer. So in another project that we funded ourselves, we designed ourselves, we built ourselves, everything we did here, we did ourselves. And it's House of the Tuscan 2.0. And it was about a very similar idea to the co-op. I mean, how can we find a future for this Tuscan monster? This original building was a typical high felt Tuscan house. And I use the word house here deliberately as opposed to home, with very, very, very poorly organized spaces. And no one wanted this building, for good reason. And could we reimagine this house and transform it into something else? And so what we took this single family house and transformed it into two bedroom apartments and 6 commercial spaces. Again, with a very, very simple material palette, and the cheapest things we could get our hands on, which are of very good quality. So our fittings are all Crabtree, our lighting fittings are all the standard Eurolux fishbowl, which you'll have seen in every 1950s apartment, I suppose. And we try to give it, use these things in imaginative ways to produce really interesting spaces. Again, each space, including bedrooms, terminating in private courtyards. These photos were taken before the plants were growing. So these are now, these black walls outside are completely covered. I suppose obsessions over finding ways to be creative with minimal resources. These tiles cost us nothing. but they were all slightly mismatched white porcelain tiles, and so we broke them up and created this mosaic in the shower. A lot of the windows, very simple from Windblock, which I think is an amazing company. But very simple materials, all built, all constructed ourselves, with the commercial spaces, waiting rooms. Now, why do I say this? In this thing, we respect labor. Well, because we take on the work ourselves in these projects, and I would love to do it more. Because we provide accommodation for the guys on site, because we pay them slightly above what is normal. And by providing accommodation, right, they don't have to, these guys don't have to come in an hour every day and spend however much on transport. Because of that, because we give them a stipend for food, because we pay them slightly more, the guys end up taking home double what is a standard pay package as a bricklayer. Just not, it doesn't cost us any more. The guys work much longer. They're happier. They're working at, stop by 7 in the morning. They knock off at 5:30. And this is how I think, we've able to produce a really, really good building without breaking the bank. And again, everything is organized from the business modeling all the way through to the construction of the building and the furniture itself. And you can see the art. And then the final one, and this is very important, is to define the future we're desperate to inhabit. Now, as architect, I think our gifts, or our gift to society should be the guardianship of our cities. And over the past decades, I think our profession has handed that stewardship over to property developers, retirement annuities, and big box capital. The cities we want to walk through, the homes we want to wake up in, the landscapes we want to coexist with, these should not be abstract dreams. These should be the blueprints we must produce. And we must produce them from conception to funding to construction. This is my belief as an architect. If we don't take control of shaping the built environment, someone else will, and someone else has. And the result will be a world of compromise rather than of intention. So I suppose I really beg our profession to begin seriously defining the spaces that inspire, that shelter, and endure, and then to build towards this future with an immense urgency. House of the Thousand Courtyards is our bigger goal. And it incorporates House of the Tuscan 2.0 and House of the Co-op. And this is it. It's a vision for a remarkable South African city, actually, a remarkable global city, but built off the bones of what is existing. And in our case, it's built off the bones of apartheid suburbia. And I think if we can produce something like this within those bones, I think, those gifts I spoke of earlier, we would have fulfilled that to society. So what I'd like to see is quarter stands next to multi-million-dollar show spaces. I'd love to see movie theaters and event spaces art galleries and cafes, theater spaces and concert spaces, ice cream parlors, coffee shops, art studios, exercise spaces, schools, apartments, and hairdressers, all sharing the same spaces, and all done with a certain ad hocness and intensity that I think, we could learn from, like those intensities that are so obvious in Mamelodi in Pretoria, for instance. Those intensities and those ideas need to be brought forward or brought into suburbia, and the ideas of suburbia need to be brought into Mamelodi. What I mean by this is a greater thing. Is in South Africa we have an obsession with talking of the city or the CBD, and then talking of suburbia, and then talking of Mamelodi or the township, a word I hate. We have an obsession of divorcing these ideas. And I think what that brings about is this idea of the problems of suburbia must be solved in suburbia. The problems of the township must be solved in the township. The problem of the CBD must be solved in the CBD. I think the problems of the city need to be solved in the city. I think that's a healthier way of reframing the problem set. And by designing very small spaces, I think we'll be able to accommodate a whole bunch of separate demographics in one area, as opposed to the monotony of suburbia, which is one program type, one income type. This is like a monoculture, brought into architecture. So how do we achieve this thing? Okay, well, we're busy doing it at the moment, slowly. But this is what we have in our hands. We have 4 properties, and they currently serve. This is phase one of the project that a whole set of these projects that we're busy with. But suburbia is it is 4 properties, 4,000 square meters or so, and it's currently before we took these buildings over, was servicing 3 families. And what we're trying to do phase by phase, slowly testing out a whole bunch of issues, and performing these acts one step at a time with our own money, testing out these ideas. What I think we're able to do is transform a city which could only accommodate or could only service 3 people. By looking at the suburban world differently, I think we can produce a world which services 12 families and 42 businesses. That, for me, is the carrying capacity of the same area without massive interventions. Yeah, and I think to bring it all round, I think House of a Thousand Courtyards and the other projects which are similar in nature to this, I hope that the 11 ideas I spoke about today, I really hope that we can bring these ideas and be consistent with them in the production of these cities, which I hope will be gifts to our society. And yeah, because I think our society deserves some great cities. Cool. Thank you very much.
And thank you so much for that. Very, very insightful. The simplicity that one can see in the space is quite captivating. And once you learn of the meaning behind their creation, you appreciate the architecture even more. I guess it comes from a place of honesty and just understanding what you are creating the space for. What would you say is your inspiration? because you have a very palpable philosophy and how you look at things. What would you say inspires you?
Sure. That's a really, really great question. I mean, my my personal obsessions are vast. Um, I am uh, I'm I'm obsessed with woodworking. I'm obsessed with painting. I'm obsessed with bird watching, with knowing um, the names of trees and how these things are fit into an ecosystem. Um, so I'm obsessed with music in a way that's probably slightly unhealthy. But um, I suppose I'm obsessed with a lot of things, and so my knowledge is very wide, but incredibly shallow. If I talk about, which I think is your question, mm, what is my inspiration in architecture, where I suppose my knowledge is a bit deeper and a bit narrower. Um, it's the everyday spaces. Um, I've never been obsessed with Le Corbusier. I don't think he was a very good architect. Mies van der Rohe, I think, was worse. Piers Paul uh, is is quite average to me. Um, my obsessions are the everyday houses that I've seen. Small spaces are very interesting to me. You know, I don't think if I I'm not sure if it's coincidence, but for me, the unfussier spaces, the smaller the homes, um, those are the worlds which have had the kinder people and the happier music, if I can put it that way. Um, um, so I take very, very seriously the architecture of Mamelodi, for instance. The architecture of Drizik is serious. The the suburban apartheid architecture. These are my inspirations because I'm South African and you know it's the world we're given, and now we need to find extraordinary things within these very ordinary circumstances.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you for
I'm
that.
sorry for such a broad answer.
Yeah. No, but yeah, I absolutely get it from that explanation. Thanks. And then with working with furniture, I guess it makes you appreciate detailing even more because you can't realize exactly what you want without being more involved in the construction process. Could you just elaborate on that? You're involved because when you look at the spaces, it does look like it comes out as conceived. How involved are you, or do you feel you go over and above what an architect would do in terms of making sure that how the roof meets the wall, the floor meets the wall, the detailing that makes the space as complete as you have them?
I think a lot of the detailing, um, for instance, if I look at um, House of the Cape Robin, for instance, the detailing is I think it's fastidious, but it's kind of systematic in the sense that I draw a detail of what a cornice looks like, and it's a 20 by 20 mil piece of pine, and that's going to be our cornice. Because I know what all the junctions look like. I've been involved in construction, actually building stuff for a long time. My childhood was spent fixing fences mostly, you know. Um, so that's the world I come from. So I've always that's why I say thinking with your hands, thinking with your whole body is exceptionally important because there is immense amount of intelligence in having worked, um, having laid bricks, having welded steel, um, having cut wood. You know how these things work, and so you're able to make the details work with the construction as often is the cases in Pawson, for instance, where the detailing works against construction. I think Again, it talks into respecting workers and their labor. Like, you got to try and make their job, they've got a tough job moving bricks, laying bricks, all of this stuff. So you try and make it as easy within those parameters and as possible. So I suppose my detailing is all linked to the construction methods, and about systematizing things. You will notice I very often, there's only one plug we use, and that is a Crabtree 4x4 2 times 3-point plug. That's the only plug we use. We have only used that Eurolux light because I think it works incredibly well. If you hang it from ceilings, it becomes a glowing orb. It becomes almost religious. And you can put it horizontally against the wall on the outside. It's incredibly versatile. So I suppose what I'm saying is the detailing, I try to produce incredibly versatile details. If I give another banal example, shelving is a big thing for me. So we designed a shelving bracket, which has 4 holes, and the holes are 75 mils apart. And the reason for that is we need to hang these shelves on existing structures, and often those existing walls have like the only thing holding it together is like some dugger that was thrown into a cavity 50 years ago. And so when you get the bent steel shelving brackets, the holes are too close together. So if you get a dud piece of wall on the top, one of the top 2, your shelving bracket's going to be loose. So the reason our shelving brackets look the way they do is because the holes that we drill in to get the plugs in are 75 mils apart, so that we don't get dud wall all the time. And that's an incredibly banal example, but that's why the shelving brackets and all of those brackets look the way they do, because I had the same problems with shelving brackets in House of the Yellow Wall, for instance. So in future projects, I designed a new shelving bracket, but that shelving bracket is now in revision 8, and it's now almost perfect, I suspect. It needs one more revision, I think.
Great. Thank you so much. And colleagues, I'll open this opportunity for questions and comments. What would you say, and in your view, having gone through architectural education and having practiced now for a while, what would you say we need to add in our education to make better architects?
Sure. Okay, so obviously from my side, I think the education needs to be more holistic. I think it needs to involve a bricklaying course, it needs to involve a woodworking course, it needs to involve a drywalling course, how to cast the slab, how to set screed. These things have to be in an architectural education, particularly for masters. I think it's super, super important. But I think that's from an education perspective. From a professions perspective, my worry is that I think we're serving a very niche portion of society. We're serving a the top 1%, and I would love for a structure to be organized where systems can be implemented by architects for the other 99%. And I think that might be in line with the medical profession, how that's organized. I think that might be a healthier way. After the collapse of, now I'm going in a different direction, but I hope the parallel will be obvious, is during the collapse of the Soviets, Cuba went through a food crisis, where the month after the collapse of the Soviets, their calorific, their meat intake or their meat production, which was all imported, I suppose, dropped to 10% of what it was the month before. So their calorific intake was 40% of what it was the month before. And so what Fidel organized and Che organized was for the army to be reorganized into an agricultural division, so that the army would be pushed out into the cities and to show how urban agriculture could be performed in Havana, for instance. And within 3 months, they were outperforming the agriculture that was pre-Soviet. They were producing more calories, producing more meat than what was being supplied to them by the Soviets. So I would love to see architects performing a similar role in society to what the army was doing during the collapse in Cuba during the collapse of the Soviets. I know that's an incredibly broad answer and it went in a different direction, but that's for me. I think we should be far more attentive to normal spaces.
No, thanks, and well understood. We should look at our contribution to society over and above being just technical people who perfect a craft by hands only.
Yeah, 100%. I think we can be incredibly valuable contributors to society, but I think our profession itself has also marginalized itself into being like a draftsman for very wealthy people. So if we take on our own development, if we start being the stewards of our own cities, I think our profession will be in a healthier place, and I think our cities will benefit from it.
Well said. Thank you. President Kilepsi?
Hi. Sorry, my camera's been disabled. Thank you so much, Ant, for sharing your design philosophy and your vision with us. I think there's so many relevant, I can't even begin to touch on how many relevant statements you've made here. And I love the way you blur the line between the inside and outside, and your integration of the furniture as part of the architecture, and the simplicity of the vision. I think, yeah, thank you very much. I think we've all walking away from this being enriched, not just only on a visual level, but on a philosophical and deep thought level. So thank you very much for sharing.
Thanks, Monica. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
By the way, now the name of the author comes to me is Willard Manus, from the second slide of the presentation. It would come to me eventually. Sorry for butting it.
No, cool. Any other question or comment, colleagues? All good. Well, and thank you so much for such a wonderful start to our Friday and weekend. Okay, there's Ken. Ken? Mr. Liver?
There we go. I've managed. Thanks, Cora. And thank you very much. I mean, really, so much to think about. And obviously, you're a seriously thinking architect. Tell me, how important, though, is it for you to discuss with your client their own preferences? You obviously have a very powerful character. And do you impose everything on your client, or do you listen to them? I mean, I'm intrigued with your relative lack of color in your work, in a continent that is full of color, but I'm afraid our community tends to ignore, which troubles me. I certainly live in an area on the north coast where the only color you can use is grey or grey or grey. Anyway, that's one particular side of things. The other thing that I'm intrigued with is your whole concern about love and about compassion and concern for others. One of the biggest problems I have with the English language and the way in which we communicate is really the limitation of words. And the Greeks had a whole series of words for love. And what we tend to confuse in our part of the world, in my view, is compassion, passion rather than compassion, passion, lust, and so on with love. And I think the thing that really sticks in my mind is faith, hope, and charity, or love. And love is the greatest of these. Anyway, well done. Thank you very much for that presentation. Wonderful. And can we communicate with you? How do we do that? Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. What a wonderful set of comments and questions. I mean, you can, if you get Kiara, you can more than welcome to get my cell phone number from her. Otherwise, how's it at frankiepappas.com is a good way to communicate.
Good, thank you. So,
on the do I listen to my clients? I hope so. I have a really long book. It's probably 40 pages in order to, and this is with residential stuff, but about what they want to achieve with a building. It talks a lot about materials. It talks a lot about who they are, how they want to spend one special day, how they spend a weekend, for instance, how they spend a public holiday, how they spend a completely normal day. It's an incredibly arduous thing to go through. But I think it also asks them to know what they want. And this is a very, very long book, and it's kind of a briefing document, I suppose. And I asked them to make it fun. They must chat and do it over a glass of wine and draw on it and whatever the case may be. And that becomes the organizer for residential spaces. But you are right. There's besides House of the Pink Spot, I am saddened by how little color there is in my work. The picture you're looking at now, I wanted to paint jacaranda purple. That was the goal. My partners went against that and said it needs to be a normal color in inverted commas. And so I made it black. And the reason for that, the black and the white in this, for instance, again became a very typical, it became a detailing issue where I can get light fittings in white and black very easily. I can get brooms in white and black. I can get anything I need, I can get in black and white. But to get it in purple is very difficult. And to get purple wood stain is very difficult. To get all these things is very difficult. So I suppose there's like a detailing decision that has produced a lot of the work that I've produced. But the short answer is, I suppose I just haven't had the opportunity. I haven't had the longest career, so I haven't had the opportunity to use color as much as I love color. I think the yellow wall was a 10-meter wall that I could paint for myself. No one else needed to know. And the pink spot, well, that was a decision to paint this thing a crazy color that could not be co-opted by any political party. So there's always a strategy behind the color, and I suppose I need to find that.
Yeah, there's an abundance of color, of course, within nature. There's the incredible range of greens. There's the flowers, the flowering trees, the flowering shrubs. And I noticed that you've got it looks like a woven light fitting hanging at the top of the picture. You know, the indigenous people, the tribal people of our country, make wonderful things out of all sorts of bits and pieces, including bits of old plastic, beads, and so on and so forth. Color is there everywhere, and yet we're ignoring it. Why are we ignoring it? Architects need to wake up a bit about that particular factor. But thank you, and thank you very much.
No, I appreciate that. I'm going to look into it. I mean, the color, it's interesting you raised that thing about the plants, because with a lot of the architecture, this picture, for instance, which is even more grown now, this thing is completely covered. For me, the building is less black than the walls may be black, but the primary architecture is the plants. That's an interesting thing for me, but that's a very nerdy architectural point. But Ken, I love that. I'm going to look into color more.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Ent. Any last question or comment?
Sorry, could I just dive in here? I think,
Yeah.
what Ken is saying, based on his extensive experience, as I'm sure he has, is it's fine to lighten up with color. I think your designs are amazing and incredibly well put together, but maybe that sense of control needs to fly away a little bit, as per your intro. That's just my comment from Port Elizabeth. Thank you.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. Thanks, Ivan.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. And thank you for taking your time and putting together this remarkable work, and very, very thought-provoking and insightful. I think everybody has learned so much this morning. What would be your last words?
No, just a massive thank you to everyone for giving me their time. I hope, I hope I was respectful of yours, and gave you some things to think about. And thanks very much for these contributions and the chat. I hope to meet you all in person at some point in the coming years.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining in. I wish everyone
before you go,
good weekend.
Can I just butt in for a sec? Sorry. I mean, wonderful presentation. Has this presentation been recorded? Are we able to access it?
It's been recorded, yeah. It's been recorded, Ken.
I think just tell the members that they can access it, please, because I think
yes, we have a YouTube channel where all the talks are recorded and posted. Super. But we can provide the link once Kiara has worked on it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Thanks,
Thank you so much,
for
everyone.
A wonderful presentation. Take care. Bye.
Bye. See you next time.
Live engagement. The talking point is up next here on SAFM after